But I think one of the key takeaways I learned was the concept of base building, which is basically like how you get kind of a coalition or a team of like-minded individuals who really want to make change and sustain that change and sustain like that team morale to go out and effectively make change in the community. So for me, I do a lot of protesting. I like to be like in the streets and very visible and that kind of thing. So learning, here are some Facebook groups you can check out that may have people who look like you. Here's how to find different organizations in your area who are doing things that you're looking to do. And just kind of learning the art of communicating with others in a way that will effectively bring you together in order to make the impact that you want to make.
Welcome to the Public Health Millennial Career Stories Podcast, episode number 20. Hi, everyone. My name is Amari Richins, and thank you so much for listening to this episode or any of the other 20 episodes that I have put out. As you guys might know, I'm going to be taking a break for a couple of weeks, and the next episode is going to be coming out on Tuesday, October 6th. So I hope you all are excited for that. I hope that everyone is doing well. I know that I'm really excited to be traveling down to North Carolina, and funnily enough, this person that I interviewed today was from North Carolina. Well, I did interview a couple of weeks ago, but nonetheless, it's from North Carolina. So I really look forward to connecting with more people in North Carolina and just around the country and around the world, and just learning more and sharing more public health stories. So I really hope you all enjoy this episode and take a lot of value. And I really enjoy this conversation, and I can't wait to just keep speaking and learning and talking with new people. And I just love doing that right now. So yeah. So without further ado, here's today's episode. This is the Public Health Millennial Career Stories Podcast, where you'll hear about diverse career stories, career strategies, get tips, and learn from others to help you in your public health career journey. If you want to learn about public health careers, or just hear public health stories, stay tuned because you won't want to miss this. Today we have a budding visionary, scholar, activist, innovator, revolutionary, liberator, and world changer. Today we have a budding visionary, scholar, activist. I'm starting. See that this happens all the time.
It's all good.
I always have to repeat this at least 3 times.
This is making me way more comfortable, so it's great.
Good. I'm glad to hear that. Okay. Today we have a budding visionary, scholar, activist, innovator, revolutionary, liberator, and world changer. She is a PhD student in the Department of Counseling and Clinical Psychology at Columbia University. She's also currently a public health analyst at RTI International in the Center for Social Determinants, Risk Behaviors, and Prevention Science. Prior to this, she completed her bachelor's in psychology, African American community health, and resilience at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. She has also launched her website, BriannaABaker.com, and a YouTube channel, Becoming Dr. Baker. We have Brianna Baker. Welcome to the show.
Hello, happy to be here.
Yeah, I'm really glad to have you. I guess we can just jump right into this. So how are you doing, and how you've been coping during these times?
I'm doing well. Definitely highs and lows during this time for sure. Trying to do my best to adjust to the different changes that are happening in my life. With starting a PhD program, but also like moving back in with my parents and getting used to living with people again. So I think I'm doing as well as I could be. So yeah, happy for the most part.
Okay, well, I'm really glad to hear that. And I'm glad that you're taking some time to come and talk to me and share your story on this show.
Yeah.
So tell us a little bit about your personal background.
My personal background, so I'm from Elon, North Carolina, which is a very small town. I think it has like 9,000 people in it, and it's very just your typical Southern small town, kind of rural, very racially homogenous. It was, I guess, an interesting upbringing living here. Definitely kind of always feeling like an outsider. But yeah, my high school was interesting. We had a tractor day, that shows you how country it is, where people would like bring their tractors to school. So yeah, I always like to tell people that. And also with it being in the South, I mean, school was canceled if it was below like 45 degrees Fahrenheit, because the buses couldn't run with it being that cold. Like we just didn't have the capacity to even have school with cold weather, which I loved because I didn't have to go to school. But yeah, I guess from my background, it was very, I guess I mentioned it being a racially homogenous area. So I think that kind of sparked my interest in public health and psychology and Black mental health, because I never had a Black teacher. I never had a Black sports coach or even a Black pastor. Like my pastor of the church was white that we went to. And so it made me very aware of my race and my position in the world. And it kind of encouraged me to dream of something better for myself. So that's a little bit of my background.
Okay, awesome. And thanks for sharing that. So where are you right now, actually?
So right now, I was just telling someone, I'm all over the place. So I start my PhD program on Wednesday. Right now, today is Friday, so I start next week. But I am not moving to New York. I am staying in North Carolina. So I'm actually back in my hometown, moved back in with my family. So that's where I am currently, but who knows? With the pandemic, I'm kind of just, seeing where life takes me. Maybe spending a weekend with my family in Florida or driving to the mountains one weekend. We'll see. But for the most part, I am in North Carolina.
Okay, awesome. And I know you know that I'm moving down to North Carolina, so I'm kind of excited to check out the
Yes.
new states and everything. So that's very exciting. But good luck in starting your new program. That's very exciting. I bet that you are thrilled to be jumping into this new adventure.
I definitely am. I mean, it's because of what's going on right now, I cannot think of a more timely occurrence to go and study, sociopolitical determinants of health and just Black wellness and well-being. I think that this is such a great opportunity, and I'm really excited for it to be happening at this time.
Yeah, definitely. So I guess, what does public health mean to you?
So I'm kind of struggling with this answer because it's so hard to conceptualize public health. But like, instead of giving you like a basic Merriam-Webster definition, I think for me, public health is it's a science, but it's the science of our moral obligation for health equity and for the appreciation of human life. It's justice. So for me, that means like using an interdisciplinary approach to improving life quality and life trajectory for communities and individuals of color, using preventative or interventive methodologies, which basically just boils down to helping those who have marginalized identities live their best life and protecting their joy and liberating them from the daily psychosocial challenges that we face. And I know public health for me, I focus on Black people just because that is my identity as a Black woman, and the historical and present day traumas that we face are extremely detrimental. And so any way I can help that is what I want to spend my life doing. And public health kind of presents itself in a lot of different ways for me. Like sometimes it's community engagement and activism or health education, and other times it's more behind the scenes work of program evaluation or writing policy recommendations and things like that.
Yeah, and you definitely encompassed a whole bunch of different things in your public health
I
definition.
did.
So thank you so much for that. So you did your bachelor's in psychology, African American community health and resilience at University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. Like, what what made you decide to go into this bachelor's degree?
It's actually kind of a funny story. I was telling my dad the other day about psychology, just because I've always loved the human mind. I think, though, a lot of people think that with my research interests, my love for psychology kind of started with like these racial interests and stuff, but it actually didn't. It started because when I was about 12, I grew up with two older brothers. So when I was 12, I remember being so frustrated with the fact that my brothers got to do things that I couldn't. I mean, they were older, but I thought it was unfair. So I remember like going on Yahoo Answers, this is like really back in the day, or on Google and just Googling, like, why do my parents treat me differently? And I think Alfred Adler's like birth order psychology, kind of individual psychology came up, and I was like, oh, like this is really interesting. I really like this. I'm going to show this to my parents. This shows, I guess I was a budding researcher from the start, but like I'm going to show this to my parents and maybe they'll start treating me more fairly. So that's how I came to discover psychology. And it kind of evolved. But it's interesting because it evolved always like in this social justice kind of framework, even though I didn't have the word for it back then. It was always about unfair treatment. My SAT scores weren't amazing, so I remember being like, I'm going to look into this and see why testing is unfair and it's not a great measurement of intelligence and things like that. So I was always very interested, I guess, in the mind and the human mind's potential. So that's how that came about. My interdisciplinary studies major, it's kind of a create your own major type deal at UNC, where you can take courses from a lot of different disciplines. So for me, this came about because I was actually very indecisive about what I wanted my second major to be in, because I was fortunate to go into college with some credits already. So I had enough time to pursue a double major. And I remember like, maybe I should do public policy, maybe I should do political science. We have a public health degree, but it was in health policy and management, and I wasn't quite sure if that's what I wanted to do. So I ended up doing the create your own major, which was actually against the advice of a lot of people because they thought that it wouldn't be marketable to like employers or grad schools, when it actually turned out to be the opposite. But yeah, I took courses from African American studies, global studies, and public health and sociology, and kind of combined them all together to come up with African American community health and resilience. That was a really long answer.
No, I love it, and that's really awesome. I feel like people, for the most part, I guess you usually put like sociology and public health in one bucket, and then psychology in another bucket. And I think the two of them are very important. Well, the three of them are very important together. And I think that's very interesting for you to have that psychology bachelor's as well as creating your own, I guess, African American community health and resilience interdisciplinary major. So I know you said a lot of people advised you against that, and right now you think that has worked like in your favor, I guess. So can you just talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, because people don't know what it is, it always opens up discussion. And for me, being able to show kind of my evolution into public health, because I love psychology. I still do. I mean, I guess that's why I'm getting a PhD in it. But I really wanted to focus on the bigger picture more so than the individual, because we know that there's so many factors that influence our thinking and our individual behaviors. So being able to show, okay, this major that I created is meant to kind of supplement psychology and make it a big picture focus of all the social determinants that affect the African American experience, has opened up a lot of conversation, has opened up a lot of doors because it is interdisciplinary. I can kind of market it to different things. So when I applied to programs, I didn't just apply to psychology programs. I applied to sociology and health behavior as well, just because I could go so many different ways with what I studied. So I definitely encourage that 100%.
Yeah, and that sounds awesome. And I'm glad that you did do that. So would you say that your African American community health and resilience part was public health and like the classes were public health focused?
I think so. I think I couldn't find what I wanted within our public health school for what they offered undergrad. But, you know, it took me a long time to actually realize what I was doing is public health, and because public health is so broad. But I would definitely classify that as public health because I wanted to draw attention to the African American population or the American population as a whole and show how it functions optimally when we have Black people elevated. So I think that, yeah, I would definitely classify it as public health.
Okay, thank you. So what experiences, if any, stood out to you or do you want to chat about from your bachelor's degree?
So two experiences come to mind. One was definitely my honors thesis, because that was just like my introduction to doing research by myself, which was scary because I think when you're an undergrad, you know, you get involved with labs and they bring you on maybe for a small part, like a literature review, and you're always kind of on the periphery of what's going on to the larger project. But when you're doing a senior honors thesis, this is your project. You know, you're involved the ins and outs from the beginning to the end, from proposal to IRB to data collection, analysis, dissemination, all of it. So I did my honors thesis on hurricane survival in African American populations. So I went out to Eastern North Carolina where Hurricane Matthew had hit in 2017. And even though I did my research a year later, there was still so much there. There was people were displaced from their homes, dealing with FEMA still, trying to get recovery. So I used activated resilience theory to kind of come up with a model for post-disaster recovery in African Americans. So that was a lot of fun going out into the community. It was definitely humbling because I think as researchers, we're often really removed from the experiences of the people that we study or the communities that we want to help. So that experience of actually getting out to go in the community and do this participatory based research, like that was such a great experience for me and definitely led me, I think, to where I'm at now. And then the other experience was called the Francis Phillips Travel Scholarship or Travel Fellowship. And that was amazing. Basically, they select 20 juniors or seniors from UNC who haven't had any previous opportunities to travel or any extensive experience to travel. And they give you like $10,000 to go and do your own like personal enrichment experience. So it doesn't have to be research-based. Mine was. I went and studied race relations in Western Europe. But I was able to go solo and travel to 12 countries in Western Europe, just talking to people and eating really great food. So that experience definitely stands out as well.
Okay, yeah, and that sounds like it was truly awesome. So tell me about what's not your honors paper, is it? Is it your honors thesis?
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah.
it seems like you definitely focus more on the public health side of your degree as opposed to the psychology side of it. So to tell us why you decided to focus on that.
It was kind of, to be honest, it was due a lot to the structure of UNC. Because to do your honors thesis in psychology, you had to have like a mentor in the psych department that was willing to let you do research with them, and you had to enroll in a certain class, and it just wasn't working out with like my schedule and all of this stuff. But at the same time, what I wanted to do, I guess, didn't really fit into psychology specifically. Public health for me seemed a lot more open because public health, I think, is just this big compilation of so many other fields and techniques. Psychology was more strict, and I felt more boxed in with wanting to go out in the community and collect data and wanting to focus on policy implications and wanting to just, I don't know, explore. Like, I think public health was definitely more exploratory. And yeah, that's why I went and focused, I think, on that side of things.
Yeah, and I could definitely see how that would work out for you. So thanks for sharing that. So next you had
No problem.
Yeah, no problem. And then next you had a research and policy analyst position at Duke University. So tell me how you got this position and then what you did in it.
It's so funny. I was telling my dad the other day as I was like, preparing to be on this podcast, I was like, some of these questions, it's just funny how life works out and how you kind of just fall into different positions that present themselves by just always kind of saying yes to whatever comes. Mm-hmm. So I got the position, honestly, by just following my interest. So I started in January of 2019, which was the second semester of my senior year at UNC. And I just kind of found out that I didn't get into graduate school. And so it was a really hard experience for me. And it was also an exploratory period for me because I was like, I don't know if psychology is what I want to do anymore. I just got rejected, so let me go and seek out other things. And this job posting came up it was working in human trafficking, immigration policy, and missing persons research. And I've always loved investigation discovery. And I was like, oh, forensics, this sounds really cool and interesting. So I applied, and I was lucky to be underloading, which means I only took like 6 credit hours that semester. So I had the capacity to work a full-time job. So because I'm crazy, I signed up to work a full-time job my last semester of college. But it was such a monumental experience for me because I was able to help coordinate an NIH study that looked at the ethics of using DNA and other like biogenetic material in missing persons and human trafficking cases, as well as immigration, especially when crossing the US-Mexico border. So yeah, that's kind of how I found that.
Okay, yeah, that sounds like a really cool opportunity. How long did you do that?
I worked there about 7 months.
Okay.
So it was kind of a short stint, but definitely learned a lot in those 7 months.
Yeah, especially saying that you didn't really want to go into the Department of Public Health because it was like management and policy side. So it's kind of interesting that you came back to this.
I know, and I blame like not having exposure to what that meant, because I mean, I think a lot of people when they go into college, it's like, okay, you can be a doctor, you can be a lawyer, and there's like no in between. So like figuring out those different career paths within that was such a long process for me. So when I initially heard health policy and management, like when I think of management, I think of like restaurant manager. Like I didn't know, my brain didn't have like the understanding of what that meant. And then policy, I was like, health policy, what is it? That sounds boring. I don't want to like sit and read bills all day. Like this just does not sound like something I'm interested in. So I was so turned off by the idea, which now it's what I do. So it all worked out in the end.
Yeah, and that is very illuminating, and I think it's so true for so many people, especially in public health, because no one really knows what's going on in public health. So we do not know like what those positions, what those departments and stuff really mean, and I guess it could be scary, or it could just lead you away from it when it actually is something that you actually want to pursue. But I'm glad that it came kind of full circle for you there.
It definitely did. I mean, and the policy part of that Duke job was the most interesting part of all of it. I was like, wow, policy really does affect everything that we do. That's so crazy. Because I worked a lot with DNA from like Ancestry.com and 23andMe, like these fun things that people like to do. and started learning about how there's actually no laws that kind of govern what they do with that genetic material after we send the sample. And so I was like, like this could really affect my life. So yeah, definitely got interested in the policy implications of that for sure.
Okay, yeah, and definitely. We could probably talk about that off air. That sounds pretty interesting.
Oh, definitely.
Yeah. Your next position was a Freedom Summer Community Organizing Fellow at North Carolina Black Leadership and Organizing Collective. So my first question is, was this an internship or a position, and how did you come across this?
Yeah, so I'm actually in that currently because, again, I'm insane and take on way too many things at once. Um, so it's a summer fellowship, kind of like an internship type deal, where they selected 50 activists or activists in the making from North Carolina and train them in community organizing. So anything from registering people to vote to protesting to educating people about the political climate of North Carolina and nationally as well. So that right now kind of looks like taking a lot of Zoom trainings because nothing's really in person. So like every day at 6 o'clock, I kind of log on to Zoom and they'll have different information sessions about things that are going on in our state, from climate change to intersectionality, different policies. So it's been wonderful. And I came across it, honestly, just a random listing on Facebook. So I'm really glad that I found it. I've definitely learned a lot from it.
Okay, that's awesome, and I'm glad that you mentioned intersectionality. That's something that I talked to someone about yesterday, but I wanted to dive into the community
Awesome.
engagement part of this. So you said you got trained in community engagement. So like, what's a key takeaway that you learned from doing or being a community engager?
I think that right now it's so difficult with the pandemic. It's like, the word engagement to me, like first thing that comes to mind is like these face-to-face interactions and tons of people, getting to know people like that. So participating in community engagement virtually or from a distance has been difficult, honestly. But I think one of the key takeaways I learned was the concept of base building, which is basically like how you get kind of a coalition or a team of like-minded individuals who really want to make change and sustain that change and sustain like that team morale to go out and effectively make change in the community. So for me, I do a lot of protesting. I like to be like in the streets and very visible and that kind of thing. So learning, here are some Facebook groups you can check out that may have people who look like you. Here's how to find different organizations in your area who are doing things that you're looking to do, and just kind of learning the art of communicating with others in a way that will effectively bring you together in order to make the impact that you want to make. And I'm being kind of broad there, but yeah, I think that's the best answer I have.
Yeah, absolutely. And I like that you said, or you touched on wanting to meet the community where they're at and really engage them and have them as part of the process, because I think that is the most important part, and that is the ideal that we should strive for in all public health things that we do. So thank you for sharing that.
Of course, yeah. It's definitely like the grassroots level of things is what has been really amazing for me. Like you said, meeting the community where they're at and like defining community, like what is community? Because before I was like, oh yeah, community is every Black person ever. And it's like, wait, no, community is even smaller and more diverse than that. And community is, where you're at, people who are where you're at in life and where you are geographically. And so finding those people and really fostering connections that way.
Yeah, absolutely. So you had another position as a community health education coordinator at Nami. So first of all, tell us what Nami is.
Yes, National Alliance on Mental Illness.
Okay. Awesome. So that kind of it's very interesting looking at your positions because you kind of go like public health psychology. But I love it. I love it. So tell us what you did in this position.
Yeah, so it's funny. I never even thought about it like that. It's like, yeah, one position is public health, and then psychology, and then education, and then whatever else follows that. But that's why I love public health, because it is so broad. But for that position, I helped coordinate. It was called the Diverse Communities Initiative, and now I think it's called something else, kind of on Nami's national platform. But basically getting the community together and to gather in historically Black churches, to discuss things that relate to mental health issues that relate to minority and other marginalized populations. So like we did one on racial trauma, another one on kind of police community relations, one on caregiver stress, because in the Black community, we often have living situations that are multi-generational. So like my grandmother will live with me or something like that. And so it puts you in a caretaker role oftentimes. So talking about kind of the stress that comes along with that. And that was a fun experience. I ended that in May, I believe, but that was my first experience, I think, really getting to kind of teach and facilitate learning, which I always shied away from because I was like, I'm never being a teacher. Education's not my thing. But I really enjoyed it because it kind of helped me realize that I do have information to share and information that wants to be heard. So yeah.
Yeah, and I think that's one thing we always do is we undervalue ourselves and we kind of like downplay the skills that we have. But I think we can bring so much value and so much new perspective to issues and ideas. And it is kind of like that imposter syndrome that always like kicks in, and we just have to kind of like
Yeah.
figure out a way to say, okay, we are good. We deserve this. We can do this, you know. So thank you for sharing that. Um, so yeah, next,
Yeah.
wait, I don't know. No, you can continue if you want to say something.
Oh, sorry. No, I was just going to say, I mean, the imposter syndrome thing was so real. And usually I feel like my imposter syndrome is more of a function of my racial identity. This one, I think this is really fitting because this is the public health millennial. This imposter syndrome came a lot from just like being young and wanting to teach, because it's like, what do I know? I mean, the populations that, or the people that came to these health education events were, for the most part, ranging really from about 40 to 65 years old. So, you know, I get up there in the front of the room and I have my PowerPoint and I'm like, what are these people going to learn from me? You know, kind of thing. But it's interesting because they were asking questions, they have their notepads ready, they're taking notes, they're so engaged and so interested. And I was like, wow, like, okay, like you said, I do have value to bring. So that was definitely one of the best parts of that experience.
Yeah, and that sounds awesome. Can you talk about how you overcame that fear? Because you said you had a little bit of fear in presenting and, or I guess talking in front of the group, and it seemed like you did a great job if people were engaging and asking questions.
Thanks. Yeah. So my first event, oh my gosh, I was so nervous. The coordinator of Nami, Wake County, had told me that, you know, the most people that usually come to these events, probably around like 10 to 12, so I don't expect much. And so I got there and people started walking in, and then more people and more people. And I was like, wait a minute, like, what's going on here? And it ended up being around 60 people who came to this event, and I was shaking. And part of the 60 people were my family and friends, because they wanted to see me, which made me more nervous. I was terrified. So I got up there. I had rehearsed my presentation maybe once, because I don't typically rehearse. Despite how nervous I get, I didn't really rehearse. But I got up there. I was very nervous, but my first activity was like an icebreaker type thing. And I always thought that icebreakers were for like the audience, but really it was for me to kind of acclimate myself to the environment. So we kind of played a game of just like listing like your favorite song or like what is something that brings you joy in life. And it kind of, when you are in front of the audience and you're the person who's facilitating the conversation, it's up to you to set that mood and to set the tone. So once I was able to set it to something that made me feel more comfortable talking about music, talking about, just joy and happiness, I was like, okay, this is relaxed. And people were responding, which made me feel like, okay, they want to know what I have to say. Everyone wants me here, because I feel like a lot of times I walk around life wanting to prove myself to people and kind of prove my existence and my value and my worth. But when I was in that room, it was kind of already affirmed. So that definitely helped me overcome it.
Okay. Yeah, and thank you for sharing that. I think there's a lot of value in that, in like getting comfortable in with yourself and how you want to present, and then people would feed off of that energy,
Yeah.
So you have another position here as a Research to Policy Collaboration Doctoral Student Fellow. So what is this position about, or this fellowship?
Yeah. I feel like you're gonna laugh at me because it's another policy thing when I was like, no. But yeah, this came about on Twitter, which I'll probably talk about later. The importance of having a professional Twitter, because I've gotten so many opportunities through Twitter, surprisingly. But once I figured out like that I was actually really interested in policy, I was like, I should probably seek out more opportunities that help me grow in this area, and just kind of develop my policy skills and understanding. So Research to Policy Collaboration, it's an organization that grew out of the National Prevention Science Coalition. And at RTI, I work in the Center for Prevention Science. So I was already kind of familiar with the work that they did, but I didn't know that they had kind of this separate policy-focused research institute. So it's a organization that bridges the gap between lawmakers and researchers. And basically, I was kind of facilitating the process of communication between legislative offices and researchers. So when a legislative office was like, hey, we really want some more information on police brutality or something like that, I would go and connect with researchers and kind of get their recommendations on it and then present that to the legislative office. So that was definitely a very hands-on and fun experience where I got to learn a lot.
Okay. Yeah, that sounds awesome. And you touched on your other position, or I guess the position that you had before, it seemed like, and how you answered that at RTI International as a public health analyst. So first of all, tell us how you came across this position, and then what you do in it.
Yeah. So I think I had heard of RTI International. Once you come to North Carolina, you're going to be like, oh my God, RTI is everywhere. But somehow I had gone, 22 years without really hearing about it. But RTI is a really large science organization, and their motto is being dedicated to improving the human condition. So a lot of public health, but also they do like chemistry and biology. I don't really touch that stuff, but I'm in the public health sphere. I came across it actually on Indeed, which is funny because I don't think RTI really posts that many applications or job offers or whatever on Indeed.com, but that's how I found it. And I came across it. I remember I was actually on spring break and I was like, I'm not applying to jobs this week. Like, I'm going to be at the beach, I'm relaxing. But it was so interesting what they were explaining and describing that I was like, okay, I guess I'll spend some time on this application. And so I got the job, obviously, and I work in their mental health risk and resilience research program, which is in the Center of Social Determinants, Risk Behaviors, and Prevention Science. And there, my job as a public health analyst is always hard to explain because it's like a mixture of like a research assistant and a lab coordinator and a lab manager and a project manager, all like combined in one. So basically, I work on about 4 to 6 projects at a time. We do lots of program evaluation, kind of contracted by the NIH, CDC, SAMHSA, NIJ, those types of organizations. And I work on school-based mental health promotion programs, violence prevention boys and young men of color, racial healing and trauma. Like that's a project that I've been working on as well. So lots of different things.
Okay, let's jump into that healing from racial trauma topic a little bit. Like, what do you do? What are you doing on that project?
Oh my gosh, I was so hoping you would ask about it because it is my favorite job or my favorite project at RTI. I think for my job, I am the project manager of that project. It's an evaluation of an initiative called Forward Promise, which is meant to help boys and young men of color heal, grow, and thrive. That's a framework that they develop from racial trauma that they may experience. So there are 9 different grantees that we go around and collect data from to see, you know, what kind of programs they're using to be culturally responsive and kind of foster healing in these populations. And each population is different. So there's one in Hawaii for like Asian Pacific Islanders or island populations. There's one for Black fathers in Philadelphia. There's one for Mexican American boys and young men of color in Arizona. Like they're all over the place, and they all have different culturally responsive methods to facilitate healing. So my job was to go and collect the data, interview participants, interview the program leaders of these nonprofits, and take all that data and eventually kind of create a grounded theory about how we can help facilitate the healing of boys and men of color.
Okay, wow. That sounds like a really fruitful experience, like really just getting across all those different cultural lines and talk about this historical trauma and these events. And I think it's so important as public health professionals to have like cultural humility and really understanding cultures and being respectful of them and understanding how we can come in to work with those cultures to move work forward as best as possible. So you're probably leading a whole host of different things. So that's really awesome. So thank you for sharing that. Excuse me.
That project just means so much to me. I think I was able to learn a lot because especially when I came in, I was like, oh, okay, like we're talking about racial trauma. I got this. I know what it is. I'm, an expert or whatever. Like, but no, each cultural group is so different and they have so many different factors that affect the traumas that they experience and also how they cope with them. I mean, there's a lot of sameness and likeness in how we cope from racial trauma between different groups, but there's also a lot of differences that have to be acknowledged and validated because everyone's experience is different. And so learning about that definitely really humbled me because I think that I came in with this idea that my experience was the same as everybody else's who looked like me, and that's definitely not the case. So I learned a lot from that.
Yeah, and I think a lot of the time we do put like people of certain races, colors into boxes, and we shouldn't do that because people are diverse.
Yeah.
Even people in the same races and ethnicities are very diverse. So yeah. What is most exciting and least exciting in this role?
I think the most exciting would be getting to work on so many diverse projects. I think that I mentioned before that in undergrad, I was always on the periphery of projects. Like I would be maybe involved in like the analysis of one project, but never really getting to see the big picture and how it's all put together. And at RTI, they have such a team-oriented approach to their work that I'm involved in every stage of the research process. And the projects kind of like become like my babies. Like they're just like, I want to see them through. I want to make sure that everything is running smoothly with them. So definitely getting to work not only on a diverse set of projects, but also with a diverse group of people because each project has a different team. So I get to interface a lot with different people who have different backgrounds, but are all committed to public health. So sociologists, anthropologists, clinical psychologists, developmental psychologists, all of these people coming together, lots of data scientists, which I don't talk to them because they go over my head. But all of these people coming together for like the common cause of helping people through public health research. So that's definitely the most exciting. The least exciting part, I think, would be the fact that I do a lot of program evaluation means that I'm very removed from the people and the issues that brought me to public health in the first place. So I like it. I like to know that I am helping, but it's in such a removed and behind the scenes kind of role that I don't always get to see the impact that my research has on the communities that I care about. And so that's why I'm definitely really excited to get back to school and plug it back into the community, because that removed role, it can be really isolating sometimes.
Yeah, and thank you for sharing that. And that definitely can help people, because you really have to think through, like, what are you going to be doing in a role, because sometimes you're going to want to be like in the community, like meeting with community and actually getting that grassroots work done. And then sometimes you have roles that you're in the building just looking at data and looking at different things from different programs to really see if they're effective. So I think that was a very valuable statement. So I appreciate that a lot.
Of course.
Yeah, so you are about to start your PhD in counseling psychology at Columbia University Teachers College. Before I ask you why do you want to get your PhD, earlier you said that you applied to programs and you got rejected from them. So I wanted to ask, did you apply to like the same types of programs when you reapplied, or what was that like?
That's a really good question. The first go round, I applied to 5 PhD programs, and now I know why they tell you to apply to like 12 plus programs, because they are so competitive. I mean, they have like a 1 to 5% acceptance rate, which is insane when you think about it. So I had applied strictly to clinical or clinical community psychology PhD programs the first time that I applied. And I think the second time I applied to maybe one of the programs that I'd applied to the first time, but otherwise I applied to completely different programs. As you can see, I'm in counseling psychology. I'm not even doing clinical psychology this go around. So yeah, different programs for sure.
Okay, thank you. And so why did you want to get your PhD in, I guess, your PhD in counseling psychology?
Yeah, I love this topic because I had to tell myself this often, because when you're going through the process, you got to stay motivated, and you always have to constantly remember like your why and what you hope to achieve, because I haven't started yet, but I hear PhD life is hard. Graduate school in general is hard, So I guess I can answer it in 2 parts. With counseling psychology, I fell in love with it. I think a lot of people, at least where I was at UNC, we don't have a counseling psychology program. So I was never exposed to it. I only knew clinical, and clinical and counseling psychology are very, very similar. They're definitely more similar than they are different. I mean, you both take the same qualifying exam. You're going to have the same job title, same internship applications and options. So they're very, very similar. But the difference is that in counseling psychology, there's more of an integrated multicultural approach to the work, especially to the mental health counseling component. So like the clinical component of delivering therapy to a group or to an individual, they have more of a commitment to multiculturalism and just counseling people of diverse backgrounds. And obviously I really like that. I felt like with clinical psych, I was always trying to kind of bring the Black thing in, or bring in the perspective of maybe we should, try and look at different cultural groups or things like that. Whereas with counseling psychology, it was already there, and I didn't have that extra burden of bringing in diversity into thought. And there's definitely, I'm not going to say that counseling psychology is like, oh, this like super happy, inclusive thing, because it's not. It's definitely not a perfect science, but they try. And the orientation at least is there. And so I think I wanted to get my PhD just because I've always wanted to kind of revolutionize mental health, just the way that we talk about it and the way that it's practiced, and kind of being more culturally responsive and inclusive and understanding different determinants that affect our mental health. So we hear about social determinants of health, and a lot of people think of social determinants of physical health, but it's like, what about mental health, how we think? So I wanted to do that. I wanted to do it my way. With a PhD, you get a lot of kind of just autonomy that I wanted to do. The PhD is also, it's a formality. I mean, I'm not someone who really wants to go to school necessarily for 5 years, but it's, I know, a step that I have to take to make the systems level change that I want to do. And also, I know this is a long answer, but to change research as a whole, I think I actually hate going to research talks, which is funny because that's what I'm going to be doing. But I realized I hate it because of the way that they talk about data, or the way they talk about people as data. Like, you can go, I went to this research talk on suicide prevention, and they're talking about such a heavy topic, and it's something that you want to know, like the narratives and the stories about, but they were just talking about like these people as data points, like not even as human. It was just all removed and distant for them. And so I want to kind of bring like that love and humanity and affirmation back into research, because really, I mean, research is a chance for us to pursue social justice and to, like I said, affirm humanity. So I want to help change that kind of perspective.
Thank you, and I think that is really awesome. And I hope that your radical ways work out, and that you're able to revolutionize the entire mental health framework moving forward. And I just think that is so important to everything that you're doing, and I look forward to following along that journey, because I do think there's so much more to be said than just data points, and really approaching situations with, I guess, the empathy to understand that this is more than just data, and we need to appreciate that these are actual people and they have all these different factors. And another thing that I like that you talked about just now is we talk about social determinants of health, but they are mental determinants of health. So I will be looking out for more information on the mental determinants of health from you in the future, because I think it's so important. I just recently purchased a book on political determinants of health, and I think there are just so many determinants that we don't think about. I mean, we mostly focus on the social determinants, but there's so many. Well, not so many, I say, but there are other factors and other determinants that are very important for us to look at. So I'm very interested to see what comes out from your work. So I will be waiting and eagerly waiting for more stuff from you. So awesome. So currently, I guess it's currently, you work in stigma, identity, and intersectionality lab at the Teachers College, and also Cogburn Research Group. So what is this?
Yes. So I guess the best way to start is that when you're admitted to a PhD program, because these are all things that I had to learn, and I'm not going to like keep assuming that other people know them, because I definitely didn't until like less than a year ago. But when you're admitted to a PhD program, you're often admitted to an advisor whose research kind of aligns with what you want to do. So when I got accepted to Teachers College, Columbia, they placed me with, or I was accepted really by a professor named Dr. Brandon Velez. And he is the director of the Stigma, Identity, and Intersectionality Lab, which is basically interested in researching kind of the links to oppression and collective identity attitudes with mental health outcomes and people who hold multiple stigmatized identities. So like a Black woman, or maybe like a gay Black man or something like that. He's really interested in learning their mental health and career outcomes. So I start that, I guess, next week. I haven't gotten to start with research or anything this summer in that capacity, but I am really excited because the entire lab has been so welcoming. Like, beyond what I thought was possible to be welcoming for a lab. So I'm definitely excited to start that. My professor, so Dr. Velez, is actually going to be on sabbatical my first semester in the program. And so I was like, well, maybe this is a good opportunity to kind of seek out like other research. So I actually had kind of like a research crush on this researcher in the Columbia School of Social Work named Dr. Courtney Cogburn. And she directs the Cogburn Research Group, where she's interested in exploring the applications of technology, such as virtual reality, to address racism in health, which I thought was so innovative, because I was like, wait, what do you mean? But she's interested in how we can put on a set of these virtual reality goggles and literally like live somebody else's experience. Like the saying, you know, like be in someone else's shoes, like that's what she does, to help explore, you know, lived experiences in racism and discrimination. So that's been exciting. I've been able to get involved with that a little bit over the summer, doing some qualitative stuff and just gearing up for data collection in the fall. So yeah.
Yeah, that truly sounds very fascinating. And I guess I look forward to see more of that also. So I definitely gonna just keep in contact with you to just find out more about what you're doing, because you're doing some awesome stuff. I will. Okay. So jumping across to the next topic. So you recently started your website, briannaabaker.com. So why do you want to start this?
I have so many interests, Omari. Like I have so many. And one of them is like communications, because I think I'm going to talk about this later too, but I've never really seen myself as someone who's going to like become a tenured professor and have my lab there and teach. Like I don't know. I never saw that for myself. Like I see myself being very like out there. And so I like personal branding, and I was like, you know, I haven't started my PhD yet, so this is kind of weird to start a whole website about research and about who I am. But I wanted to kind of do it early so that I can watch it grow, and so that maybe others can watch it grow as well. But basically, a lot of researchers and academics have their own personal websites that showcase their research and maybe their affiliations that they have and kind of the work that they're doing. And I wanted to have a website that, yes, did that, but because my personal and professional life and motivations and values are so intersecting, I was like, man, I just make a personal website that kind of discusses who I am as a person and how that impacts my research and how that impacts the stuff that I do in the community and volunteering, and just talking about my journey as it relates to graduate school, but also as it relates to just growing up, like being in my 20s and kind of figuring out this whole adulting thing. So yeah, I think just explaining who I am as a complex individual, and also being able to display kind of the authenticity of a researcher, like behind the scenes. We're not all just like white lab coat wearing like people in a lab. Like we're human beings, and wanting to just share more about myself and what I hope to do in the world.
Okay, thank you for sharing that, and thank you for starting that. So I know along with this website you started your own YouTube channel, which I've seen you've been killing it lately. So talk us through the YouTube channel and what made you want to start.
Well, again, so my ultimate goal in life is actually to have like my own talk show type of thing, or if not a talk show, but some kind of like media production where I'm able to bring kind of Black mental health and wellness to the forefront of like American conversation, really global conversation. So I was like, you know, obviously not there yet, but a YouTube channel is a great way to kind of test the waters of what it's like to even be on camera, explaining and describing things about yourself or about the world. So I decided that I would try it out. My YouTube channel is called becoming Dr. Baker, which again is not just becoming like an actual doctor and like a researcher, but it's just becoming who I am becoming in this process, you know, character development wise and personally, like who am I becoming in these 5 years or 5+ years that it takes for me to get the degree and what I'm learning along the way. So right now I have a few videos up. One talks about graduate school rejection and eventual acceptance. Another talks about imposter syndrome. I have one about activism. So it's kind of just all over the place and all the things that come with being a student in your 20s. So yeah.
Yeah, and as you said earlier, you have a lot of interest, and I think that you should definitely just keep on pushing and just creating content around the different interests, because as like I've learned, no, like you really never know what resonates with people until you just put it out there, and then people definitely feed off of
Yeah.
that. And the best thing is to always start and then get going, you know. So I'm great. It's awesome that you have started.
Thanks.
Yeah. What would you say is the biggest challenge of having this YouTube or your website or anything like that?
Oh my gosh. There's two challenges for me. I think one is like a practical challenge of just like, oh man, I got to really come up with some content. And it's like, I started it in what I thought was going to be more of a dead period of my life, but it actually turned out to be kind of a busy period. So I'm like, how do I get a schedule of like actually creating the content really isn't that much of a problem, but like all the editing that goes into it and making sure that it flows, right? Like Amari, I'm sure you know, like from having a podcast, like it's a lot of work, and you have to learn how to prioritize, like when you have multiple social media accounts and platforms. It's like, okay, like my Instagram, I already know it's like, it's not good, but my Twitter and my YouTube is where I'm like putting in the most effort. So it's kind of like trying to prioritize and come up with content that's good and quality. Like you don't want to just to produce, like you want it to represent like who you are and what you're about. But the other challenge I have that is more of a challenge is like, I think it's kind of that imposter syndrome thing, you know, a YouTube channel, a podcast, a blog, or whatever, they're so personal and it requires you to be so vulnerable. And I found myself getting really anxious whenever I put out information like into the world, because you don't know how other people are going to view it, or if they're going to accept it, or, you know, like what they're going to say. When I put out my first YouTube video, it got like 2 thumbs down. And I was like, oh my gosh, no, like, how could somebody do that when I was just putting out my story? Like I wasn't trying to give any advice or anything, you know, are they thumbs downing me? Did I do something wrong? And so that made me really nervous to continue like creating content, especially as someone who hasn't even started their PhD yet, to be talking on a bunch of topics about academia and being as radical as I can be about things. I've definitely been met with some opposition, so having to deal with that has been a challenge for sure.
Okay. Yeah, and that definitely does sound like a tough place to be with. Don't listen to those haters, you know, your haters are your motivators. So listen, and
Yeah.
YouTube has a lot of trolls, so definitely don't listen to all those negative comments. You just keep going. You're welcome.
Thanks.
So you also said that you're on Twitter. So what is your Twitter handle, first of all? And you said that you got a lot of opportunities through Twitter. So just talk a little bit about that.
Yes, I would love to talk about Twitter. So my Twitter handle is at Brianna A. Baker. Very simple. I created a Twitter. So I had a Twitter, like a personal one, but I never used it. Like I hadn't used it since like 2016 or 2017. And when I got hired at RTI, my boss followed that Twitter account. And I was like, oh my God, my boss just found me on Twitter. Like, this is crazy. Let me make sure it's all cleaned up. And there's nothing bad on there, but like, why is my boss following me on Twitter? So I went and I looked at hers and I was like, oh, like, it's not really like a personal Twitter per se. Like she's not, you know, like necessarily commenting on like all the latest world events or pop culture or anything like that. Like she was posting research articles and retweeting things that pertain to like the science community. And I was like, oh, this is really cool. Like, I didn't know that you could leverage Twitter in that way. So I ended up making a more professional account. And at first I was kind of just like following, not really posting my own things. Cause again, like very nervous to put myself out there and to, you know, talk about whatever I can in 280 characters. So I was just kind of following along. And eventually kind of got the courage to follow people who, at the time I was like applying to grad school. So following people who were in the research space that I might want to connect with, which sounds weird at first because I was like, I'm not about to DM a professor or like, you know, like, but just kind of commenting on their tweets, and eventually that facilitated relationships with these people. And Twitter is such an informal space, so it's nothing to like someone's tweet about their research, or to send a comment, or even a short DM, hey, I really appreciate your research, or that was a really cool thing that you sent. And it led to a lot of connections. It led to the research to policy collaboration opportunity. It led to me getting involved with the NAACP here in my county. It led to connecting with researchers at RTI, because RTI is such a big place. So it has like almost 6,000 employees. So being able to connect through Twitter with some of them was really cool. And it's also like, because it's so informal, people will tweet out their research papers, or they'll post videos of them talking about different things that they're doing. And it doesn't feel like work or like learning, but you are in a much more fun and collaborative space. And it's been it is social media, so you have to limit yourself, definitely. Because, you know, when people are tweeting about like all the great things that you're doing, you can start to be like, oh man, like I should be doing that too. But at the same time, like there are communities within Twitter that are so affirming, that are so welcoming, and they want to help, you know, young millennial academics and researchers and activists. So I found it to be such a place of joy. I love being on Twitter.
Okay, that's awesome. And thanks for sharing. I do not have a Twitter account as yet, but I think just talking to you now, I'm probably going to make one soon. So thanks for
Please
helping
do.
me.
I mean, yeah, definitely a great place to pub this podcast, because I know a lot of people would benefit from all the great things that you share.
Yeah, awesome. Well, look out for my Twitter, everyone. So before we move on to the last parts of the show, I just wanted to ask you I know you said you saw yourself hosting a talk show in the future. Is there anything else that you see yourself doing, or do you want to talk a little bit more about that talk show hosting? One or the other, or both?
Yeah. Sorry, my bed's uncomfortable. So like I said, I don't see myself necessarily pursuing traditional academia, because I don't know, like, even though that is the typical and common and expected thing to do for PhD holders, like I don't see myself doing that. So my ultimate goal would be kind of like meshing my loves for psychology and public health and policy and communications, and having that talk show and bringing Black mental health to the public eye and heightening awareness about health disparities, sharing stories of real lived experiences of people of color, and also encouraging healing and liberation. So I see myself kind of being highly visible in that way. And I have such big goals to kind of just disrupt the status quo and the normalization of oppression, and explain to people that they don't have to live like that, to liberate people psychologically and bring health equity and wellness promotion of people of color to the forefront of the American media conversation and the social, political, moral agendas of American culture. So broadly, that's where I see myself. I also see myself like maybe as a director of research for like a nonprofit or a research or advocacy group like the National Urban League, just where I can have more of a personable relationship with research. And then who knows, maybe eventually running for political office, like the mayor of a small town or something like that. I could definitely see myself doing like way, way down the road. So it's going to be a very interesting career. I definitely don't have it all figured out yet, but I do know that it's going to be something atypical, but something that I really enjoy.
Yeah, that's great. And I'm glad that you're pushing for that atypical, because I think we're in atypical times and we need atypical measures to get out of here in a positive light. And like there's a lot of momentum going, and I think there's a lot of space for innovation and change and new perspectives and new ways of doing things. So I think this is the perfect time to really push for all those things that you would like. And I wish you nothing but luck there.
Thank you. And well said. You're right. Atypical times call for atypical measures.
Yeah, absolutely. Because we've been doing same things for how long now, and where's that gotten us? Not to the best place, really. So it is really like
Exactly.
something that you can think about. Because yeah, so we need like as I say, we need like radical solutions to really change and help a lot, well, the most amount of people in an equitable fashion. So yeah, I think it's hugely important. Okay, so jumping into the last section of the show, the Furious five questions that I ask all guests. So question number 1, what advice would you give to a student trying to pursue a career in public health?
There's no one path to public health. And I think that's what your show is all about. I mean, it's all about highlighting these different ways and how people have gotten to where they are. And it's always like, when you're in college, people will give you like these very like prescripted like ways to get to where you want to go. Like, oh, you have to have an internship, and then you have to take this class, and then you have to have this and that. But really, there's no one way to pursue a career in public health. And I think that because public health is so broad, it's okay to kind of mesh things and have this interdisciplinary approach to a public health career, because likely, I really think that most jobs, that most fields can be used in some aspect of public health. So it all goes to kind of like framing your work so that you are showing kind of a commitment to different populations or to health equity, and not necessarily just following a certain path, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you for that. Number 2, if you're talking to someone wanting to get into your position, what advice would you give them?
I think the advice I would give is to be purposeful and to be authentic, and never, this kind of goes with the first question too, but just never compromising who you really are for who you think that you should be. Because I mean, if you listen to the whole episode, I have a lot of interest. And I think that that's okay. And I think that a lot of people try to box you in, and a lot of people have these ideas of what a researcher should be and what they should do, but you don't have to listen to that. Like, it's okay to want to be a researcher and also a movie star, because like you can, just because nobody else is doing it, maybe that's something that you're meant to pioneer. And I think that so many of my successes or opportunities that I've had have come from deviating from the norm. So like creating my own major in undergrad, or pursuing policy as a psychology major, all of those things, just saying yes to the different opportunities because they interested me, not because I thought that they would get me ahead, worked out in my favor. So yeah, staying true to who you are led me to being able to dive more into my purpose, which I think my purpose is really, pursuing health equity and social justice.
Thank you. Number 3, what's something you're working on improving in your life right now?
So many things. We never stop growing. I think really, I'm reading this book called Dream Big by Bob Goff, and it's really made me work on exercising self-compassion, because I think the downside of being such a visionary and like having like this big vision for systems that will change and blah, 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 is the realization that it's not going to happen like in a day or a year or even your lifetime. And so I'm really working on my ability to be more graceful with myself when I can't accomplish all that's all that I put on my plate, because I struggle a lot with putting a lot of pressure on myself to do certain things, to make this impact, to be big and well known and all that kind of stuff. Like, that I really have to practice self-compassion, because in reality, it's not going to happen as quickly as I may like for it to. And I can't beat myself up for, the world not changing when I say change. So self-compassion is something I'm working on.
Great. Number 4, professionally, do you recommend anything?
I recommend a professional Twitter. I cannot stress it enough. I know it's not a specific thing, but if you are on Twitter, I would follow Open Academics. It's an account that is very just inviting and very helpful for young researchers to kind of connect with each other. And they post a lot of stuff about, like failing and how that's okay. It's just been a very positive community for me. And I'd also, if you're interested in Black mental health, on Twitter, we are starting a Black and Mental Health Week, which is September 20th through 26th, which kind of highlights Black excellence in mental health fields. So if you're interested in that, I highly recommend tuning in that week and following them on Twitter.
Okay. Awesome. Thank you for sharing that. And last but not least, where can people connect with you?
Anywhere and everywhere. I think the best place to connect with me probably is on Twitter at Brianna A. Baker. Also YouTube, Becoming Dr. Baker, LinkedIn, which is how I found Amari, and my website, briannaabaker.com.
Awesome. And I'll be sure to put all of that in the show notes. Thank you so much for being on the show today, Brianna. I appreciate your perspectives and your drive to want to be that innovator, and that really change systems around and change how things have been doing, and really change the status quo. I guess that's what I was trying to say. So I appreciate that a lot.
Of course. Thank you so much for having me on your show. This has been a wonderful experience.
Yeah, my pleasure. And I look forward to continuing following your journey. But we will be in contact soon for sure.
Well, thank you so much. If you listen to this episode or any of my other episodes, I really appreciate that. I would really appreciate if you subscribe, left a review like this, or share it with a friend. That would help a lot for just getting the stories out. And I'm really excited to be coming back in October 6th, hopefully refreshed and ready to really tackle this and strategically put out great content for all of you to better understand and navigate your public health careers and paths and journeys. And yeah, it's been really great working and learning and just growing with all of you. So thank you so much for tuning in, and I appreciate it a lot. And I will see you all, or you all will hear me in the next couple of weeks. If you have any questions, just hit me up on Instagram, the PH Millennial. I'm not going to be active on there a lot over the next couple of weeks, but definitely if you DM me, I will respond. But yeah, thanks so much, and Public Health Millennial out.